Welcome in college baseball fans, fans of the ACC, fans of the Commonwealth state. Back again, Monty and Jake, Virginia Tech. Let's go ahead and jump into it, Monty. Starting off with Virginia Tech, why don't you give us a quick recap, kind of what their season looked like last year?
So obviously, we're going to go back even further than last year. 2022, they had a surprising monster season, one of their best records in school history. They were, I think, one win away from a College World Series appearance before they fell in Blacksburg Super Regional, I believe, to Oklahoma. They come back last year, and the Hammer and Hokies, as they were called, they had the prop with the hammer. NCAA, no fun, took that away. They still continue to hit with the bat, but pitching completely fell apart. They were on the bubble barely, not really as much as they would have liked. By the time they got to the ACC tournament, they dropped both games the ACC tournament. That was the end of their season. They went 30-23. Their highlights include they swept Georgia Tech, they split with Duke, but their big series win was against then number 5 Virginia, their in-state rivals. So the Hokies, not a great year under head coach John Sheff. He's entering his 7th season. It's going to be an interesting year for the Hokies this season.
We also have they broke the Florida State runs allowed record in a random Friday night game. They scored 24 runs, came back down from 5-0. Was personally my favorite game that I saw last year. It was nuts. They had a live raccoon running around the stadium. Multiple players hit for the cycle. I mean, it was a wild experience.
How long was that game?
It was, I think, about a 4-hour game.
Oh, that's not as bad as I thought it was. I thought it was,
but
the game
got flexed. It got flexed, so it started at 8 local time, and then it went like a crazy amount of time. And then by the time we were leaving the stadium, it was 1 or 2 a.m. The Florida State, they had the circus though, but the circus was popping out there. There were definitely more people at the circus than probably the game.
Well, the game sounded like a circus. You had the merry-go-rounds and the raccoon on the loose, so it sounds like the circus bled over a bit into the game.
Yeah, I mean, we had, I think, an inside the park home run too, if I believe correctly, where the center fielder dove for the ball and it got by him. But, let's go ahead and kind of get into the elephant in the room with Virginia Tech. Brody Donay departed, left, was likely going to be their starting catcher. Actually, was going to be their starting catcher.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah. Probably first team preseason ACC too as well. He ends up transferring to Florida, and they have really big holes to fill. Jack Hurley leaves. Carson Jones leaves. Drew Hackenberg, their Saturday guy, who is tremendous.
Well, that's what I was going to say is they're losing those 3 key pieces. Brady Donay is probably going to be the starting catcher at Florida, but the bigger losses is Drew Hackenberg, who and Anthony Garguelis and Griffin Green. Those are your 3 rotational guys from last season. Although Griffin Green got hurt and didn't pitch much beyond the 9 games, but that pitching is what you're losing. Christian Worley, your only reliever that had under a 3.0 ERA, and Henry Weicker had 16 appearances. He's transferred. So I'm more concerned with the pitching losses than the hitting. Although Jack Hurley's a stud, Brody Donay is a huge loss. With once you see this lineup.
And I will say this, I know Chad Penner went to Virginia Tech, but there has just been a massive influx of talent that they've had that really this program has never seen. I mean, they have had guys go in the first round, which, I mean, you can talk about what their MLB careers are done, but at Virginia Tech, they dominated. Jack Hurley went really high, Carson Jones. And again, that pitching that was such a big issue for him last year, I mean, Drew Hackenberg pitched a ton for them. Anthony Garguelis, I mean, when I saw him, he was well over 120 pitches, and they still let him go. So that bullpen was shaky last year, and then they lose their Friday, Saturday, Sunday guys. I think that really, really worries me about Virginia Tech before we kind of peak a little bit. But that's the one thing that I think is going to hold this team back is the pitching.
Yeah, and we'll get into that as we get here. But at the same time, unlike some of the other teams where we know a little bit about the pitching but we have question marks, their pitching is almost who knows. And we'll get into that once we get into pitching. But first, we're going to go talk about the strength of this Virginia Tech baseball team, and that's their lineup.
Yeah, Monty, if you want to get that graphic pulled up. I know last time we had a little bit of technical difficulties with the graphics. We'll go ahead and make sure that graphic is pulled up this time before we jump into it.
There we go. We are
There we
in.
go.
Yep. So we're gonna
So
start.
like we mentioned. Oh, go ahead, Monty.
No, I was just go ahead.
I was just say, like we mentioned, Brody Donay is the big key piece that is missing. They didn't go out and get a transfer, so we are looking for Henry Cook to be the projected starter. Very, very limited action. Only saw 16 games played and only 27 at bats out of that. Garrick Ebel, who we've kind of seen him been in and out of the lineup before Brody Donay kind of took over, he is back for his senior year. And then David McCann, that freshman, is kind of who we project to get back there. But again, Garrick Ebel, we kind of see more as a defensive first kind of catcher, with Henry Cook kind of looking to shoulder a lot of that load.
Yeah, I think that Henry Cook's going to get the nod. No, if he struggles, you'll see Garrick in there early on in the season. But I think before the season's out, David McCann will force his way in there. I don't think he's quite ready at a collegiate level to catch at the beginning of the season, but he's got an advanced college ready bat. And I think just like Donay last season as a freshman came in, in late March or so, it's going to be a similar situation with David McCann because they're not going to be able to resist that bat.
Yeah, and again, we've seen early that especially, with Coach John, how he kind of does. I mean, he's not afraid to kind of yank somebody really early into the staff if they're struggling. And I think that we'll see that possibly with David McCann if Henry Cook or Garrick Ebel kind of struggle. But again, I think that this is going to pay dividends as he can kind of get those experiences and learn how to kind of manage this pitching staff down the stretch. Because if you look at it, that loss to Brody Donay is going to be a very, very big one.
Oh, yeah. And especially when you take a look at the big strength of this team, they could arguably have the best infield in the conference, which is stunning for a team that's on the lower half of the conference. You bring back your top two hitters, which Jack Hurley was great last year, but the top two hitters were Christian Martin and Garrett Michelle over on the right side of the infield. And then you bring back he's already been named in a couple of preseason All-American lists as a third-team All-American, and that's Carson DiMartini at third base. And then you bring back Clay Grady, who had a sensational freshman season, and that is a stacked infield for the Hokies. And
if you really do remove Clay Grady too, these are three very, very powerful bats. I know Christian Martin swings it very, very well too. He's kind of the guy that, top of the lineup, batted first or second pretty much all last year. It really was kind of the catalyst for this lineup. And again, I think that's what I expect from this lineup too as well. They're going to have to win a ton of games with shootouts. And this infield, I think, is one of the best in the ACC.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of Garrett Michelle over at first base. 339, 16 doubles, 11 home runs, 45 RBIs. He had a pretty good Cape Cod season. He is a stud. He's only a sophomore, so the Hokies are hoping to get another year out of him after this one. He's my big bat to watch, obviously behind Carson DiMartini, who's always going to be the guy that's circled in that lineup. DiMartini's numbers were a little bit down last year. He played through a shoulder injury for most of the season, but he still hit 323, 13 doubles, 10 home runs, stole 9 bases. Those numbers are going to improve if he's healthy all year.
Yeah, and then up the middle, Clay Grady and Christian Martin, too, kind of provide stability at the infield. I mean, Clay Grady is a freshman, I don't think made an error all year. And Christian Martin's always kind of been a sure-handed fielder. That's kind of been his MO. So, again, this team isn't going to be one. I know that they're going to be struggling for outs, but they're not going to be ones to give away a lot of outs in this infield.
Yeah, and once you get beyond these 4 guys, however, we talk about them having the best infield, there's not a whole bunch of clear depth. I think there's some talent there. You've got Carter Newman, who is listed as a utility guy, but can play basically anywhere on the diamond outside of catcher. He can play outfield. He played shortstop in high school. And then you've got 2 talented freshmen in Ethan Gibson. He's a 2-way player, and Preston Crowell, who was the number 1 third base recruit in Virginia. So they've got some talent. The question is if those guys are ready or if they're going to even get at bats with the way, ideally they don't get many at bats with the 4 guys ahead of them.
Yeah, I mean, you might see Preston Crowell too move kind of to a corner outfield spot or a DH if he does kind of force himself into this lineup because, again, he's not going to get playing time over Carson DiMartini, Christian Martin, and Clay Grady's glove alone is going to keep them in this lineup. So I think he's kind of the only one that you can really kind of watch out for of those guys in kind of the second tier. But again, this is far and away, I think, one of the best infields that Virginia Tech's seen probably ever.
Yeah, and that's what gives me a little bit of hope on their season. I think a lot of people are putting them down in the 12, 13, 14 range of the ACC. I think they could be surprised, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's talk about their outfield here. They return Eddie Izert, who had a fantastic end of the season with the Hokies last year. He was hitting home runs heading into the end of the season. Chris Canizero, who came over from Bucknell last year and just raked. The big loss, obviously, is going to be that center fielder in Jack Hurley.
Yeah, we do project Eddie Izert to be the DH and Sam Tackett to kind of start and right. Very, very limited action, only 39 at-bats, but he did hit over 308 and then showed a little bit of the pop with 2 home runs. But Chris Canizero is, I think, the big name to watch as he kind of progresses as kind of the senior bat with the graduate one. I think he's a name to really watch out for. And then Ben Watson, which, again, I know we always say take D3 stats with a grain of salt, hit 483 out of Elizabethtown. So look for that to kind of translate too as well. And again, I think that there's a ton of underrated bats in this outfield.
Well, it's interesting. Sam Tackett is going to be the right fielder, I believe, for Virginia Tech. Coach John Sheff is really high on him, despite the fact that he hasn't played much in his first 2 or 3 years on campus. He's getting a chance. He apparently had a monster summer, got a cup of coffee at the Cape after, I think, the New England League, and just was crushing the baseball. John Sheff, I think, singled him out as a guy to look out for in this lineup out of any of the guys on his roster going into this season. And if that's true, this outfield is also kind of loaded. We didn't even touch on Eddie Micheletti, who is a transfer over from George Washington, who had to hit 384, 18 doubles, 6 home runs. That's another big time bat, and you've got 5 guys here with only 4 positions to fill if you include the DH.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see how Eddie Micheletti kind of translates over from GW and how he kind of handles this ACC bat, because I think his bat plays really, really well into a lot of the fields in the ACC. Kind of a true gap-to-gap hitter coming from that left side of the plate, which, again, I think Virginia Tech's kind of loading up and becoming lefty university. It seems like every bat that they get that's tremendous is just left-handed.
Yeah, that's why they've got to try and balance it out with Canizaro and Tackett as right-handed bats. Clay Grady's a righty in the infield, but yeah, they are very lefty dominant. But yeah, those 5 guys that we just mentioned. Nick Licurdo is a talented freshman, but I don't really see him pushing for too much playing time as long as the guys in front of him are producing, which I can't imagine them not producing enough. This is just a really good group. I really like the roster that we've got here at Virginia Tech on the offensive side of the baseball.
I really like Nick Licurdo out in center field. I think he's going to learn a ton from a lot of those older bats and kind of how to be a college baseball player. And I think that that's going to provide dividends for this Virginia Tech staff. Again, this is a very, very loaded outfield. I mean, of the 5 guys that we mentioned outside of him, I think any one of them could start at a majority of these ACC schools. So it's really going to be kind of a crazy start with Virginia Tech, especially as they kind of face some of this, early kind of lower tier pitching, how much they really kind of feast off of that.
Yeah, so this is the huge strength of Virginia Tech, and it's been their identity for several years now. They are going to hammer the baseball, and it looks like I don't see that changing in 2024.
If anything, I think it grows. I mean, Carson DeMartini missed a ton of last season with, I think it was a shoulder injury. And his bat back in the lineup, I know the kind of early word out of fall camp was his swing was looking tremendous. And I think it's going to be his last year in Blacksburg as he kind of looks to get drafted out of the spot. So he's kind of looking for a big bounce back year as well from a health standpoint. And again, I think the talent's there to be one of the better players in the ACC.
Absolutely. But now we got to talk about, we've really hyped up Virginia Tech for the first couple of minutes here, but now we got to talk about the big elephant in the room, their pitching, right? So here's the thing. On the screen right now, you should see who we have as their projected rotation. This is about as close to a stab in the dark guess as I could give you guys. They have one guy with significant starting experience, and that's going to be Jeremy Nuff, who is a graduate transfer from Richmond. He's made 39 starts in his career. Beyond that, there's not much experience at a D1 level for anybody on this roster. Jordan Little, he transfers over from East Carolina. He only had 2.2 innings of work in 2 seasons in Greenville and had an ERA of 27. So from what I understand, he is getting a look at the rotation. And then Jordan Vera, who is a transfer from Ole Miss, he had he had 13 appearances, 8.59 ERA, not great stuff. But there are other guys in the conversation.
Yeah, I was just saying seems almost like an opener, kind of almost like a 5-man rotation, so they can try and figure out who the first 3 are going to be. I mean, Jeremy Nuff in kind of limited roles, he did kind of show some great strikeout stuff, but again, Jordan Little, Jordan Verna, those are going to be names that they really kind of lean on. And the last 2 seasons, I mean, at least you don't have to worry about arm fatigue or being overthrown with those 3 guys that we're projecting. And then again, Carson Ohl, Griffin Steig, Madden Clement. I think that those are a few names to watch out for. I think Madden Clement's probably going to be the Tuesday night starter kind of to open the season. He's got really electric stuff coming from the left side of the plate, kind of more of a contact pitcher. But again, I'm really excited to see kind of where this Virginia Tech staff goes because it really does appear like it's only up from here.
It's interesting. Does the name Clement sound familiar to you?
Matt Clement?
That is his son. Yes, it is. Yep. That is Matt Clement's son. Just wanted to throw that out there for the little fun fact. But yeah, no, the big question for me is Hackenberg and Arguelles. Like you said, you saw Arguelles throw like 120 pitches. Those 2 guys 8 innings, and that's why their numbers were a little bloated. They were left out there, to just eat innings because a tired and ineffective Drew Hackenberg was better than some of the guys in their bullpen at times. So they just stuck with Hackenberg to eat innings. They don't have that anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be the innings eaters. Grant Manning is a D3. He's the only guy with significant starting experience coming over. He played at Chapman. He had a 3.58 ERA in 73 innings. He's a guy that's going to be pushing for a spot. Carson Ohl, as we talked about, these are going to be the guys that are going to compete with those 3 in the projected rotation. It could even be guys that are going to be shown here on the right with the bullpen arms. I have no idea what we're going to get out of Virginia Tech pitching, and it's interesting listening. D1 had a podcast, ACC, etc., where John Sheff was on, and he mentioned how similar the situation this season is to 2 years ago before 2022 when they had that monster year. They had no idea Drew Hackenberg and Griffin Green were going to be as good as they were. And it's a similar situation. They have no idea who the guys are going to be, and they could be special.
Yeah, Wyatt Parliament's, I think, another name to kind of watch out for out of Rutgers. He started 8 games for him last year and was really kind of up and down. I know his bullpen's a lot higher than probably it needed to be. Really kind of struggled with the walks, 15 walks in 27 innings. If he can kind of hone that in and get back to getting the electric stuff that got him in that Rutgers starting staff, I think he's another name that they could really kind of lean on. And then Trey Way, maybe the name of the year down there. Didn't see a ton of him last year as a freshman. But, hopefully he can kind of get the chances so we can learn that name a little bit more.
Yeah, I actually like their bullpen a little bit more this year than I did last year. I like Kurtner.
Well, they really didn't have a bullpen last year.
Right. So it makes it easy that, there's only so far. You can't fall any farther. So Brady Kurtner, Sentlinger, Parliament. I really like those 3 guys. It's a good back end of the bullpen kind of group. And then David Schumacher and Matthew Siverling are 2 guys that could make big impacts. But I do like the freshmen in Brent Renfro and Ryan Buckler. But the other name that hasn't been talked about much is Jason Exum. He didn't have the best numbers, but I saw him come in against UVA in relief of Hackenberg and shut down a UVA offense that had lit up Hackenberg and allowed Tech to kind of get back into the game. And he's got some talent. I think he's a guy to kind of keep an eye out for, even though he's not talked about much.
Yeah, I mean, this is a staff with a ton of question marks. But again, like you mentioned, we saw this 2 years ago, and they had guys kind of burst onto the scene. I mean, there's a few names in here that you really could kind of get accustomed to. Brett Renfro, Ryan Buckler, guys that, are going to come in as freshmen and probably get the innings to kind of go in and start. And then older guys kind of on their last leg transferring in. It's almost like an island of misfit toys, it feels like, with the staff. And if they can kind of get the right things clicking, this is a staff that really doesn't need to do a ton. I mean, if they can keep guys under 5 runs, it feels like that lineup's going to be doing like enough damage on the other side to kind of keep you in a lot of those games.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a lot higher, I think, on Virginia Tech than a lot of people. Is I think this pitching staff could be a lot better than we think it's going to be. I just don't know who it's going to be. That's going to be the guy stepping on there. Games are going to get played. We're going to find out. I'm really actually pretty excited to see this Hokie team in action, because I think they're going to upset some people, because they're going to go in thinking it's a lot easier series, and then they're going to find out they're in for some trouble.
And that's kind of a good transition into the schedule, Monty. I know that they obviously are going to be playing that Commonwealth series to close the season. Starting of the season, the non-conference really kind of leaves a ton to be desired. I mean, they play a pesky Charlotte team. They play Binghamton, Stony Brook, Rhode Island. I mean, this really is going to be kind of an RPI killer up at the front end of the schedule.
It's a shame, because they face Tennessee every year in the fall in what they call the Hokie Smoky Classic, which is a fantastic name for a series. I need that to be keep one in the fall, but I would love for that to be a non-conference annual event between the two of them at a neutral site. I mean, Tennessee is one of the best teams in the country. They should be a top 10 program this year. But throw them in a neutral site in February or early March, and I think it's going to be one of the series to watch that weekend, because so many teams are kind of, if they're not doing one of those college showdowns or neutral tournaments, it's kind of, you're just kind of inviting some of these smaller teams to beat up on them.
Yeah, and maybe they can play that series at Bristol. I'm not sure what the dimensions of the infield would look like, but I would love to kind of see them try and figure that out.
Yeah.
And again, honestly, when I see a team that doesn't go out and play in tournament settings and kind of force their scouting teams to get practice, I think it's almost a team that feels like they're not going to be in the tournament. And I know that's kind of a hot take, but if you're just going out and playing the same team every weekend, it really doesn't allow you to get into a groove. So when tournament time comes, when ACC time comes, you are unprepared for a lot of that stuff in terms of scouting reports, building staffs, innings. So I think that that's something to really watch out for. And again, yeah, it does invite teams to come in and beat you. A team is definitely more likely to beat you 1 out of 3 than 1 out of 1. And that can be a true RPI killer at a lot of these schedules.
Oh yeah, they've got not an easy ACC schedule. They're going to have to go to Boston, Louisville. They're going to have to go to Atlanta and Chapel Hill, and they do go to Virginia, which I really like that series. And we're going to probably highlight that series again at the end of the show when we talk about UVA. Virginia Tech has taken the series from UVA each of the last 2 seasons, and going into the ACC tournament, that's a huge, much bigger series now, as opposed to in previous years when it's been earlier in the season. I think that's a big way for Virginia Tech, if they're on the bubble somehow, which would be overachieving by a lot of people's standards. But if they're on the bubble, a decent showing against Virginia, where, again, last year they weren't very good, but they took 2 of 3 from a team that went to Omaha, that could put them all over the bubble and into the tournament.
Another note to kind of mention is they do play Notre Dame very, very early in Blacksburg. I think that the last 2 times those teams have tried to get together, they've had at least one of those games canceled. And hopefully that one can get played. That Wake Forest series, I mean, if you're in the ACC, you almost circle Wake Forest every single weekend. Road trips to Chapel Hill, I think, is going to be another one to kind of watch out for. But again, as we've kind of gone through a few of these, they play a few of these guns that they can kind of steal series from. They play Pitt. They play Boston College. They play Georgia Tech. So they really do have a chance to kind of have a few exclamation points. And again, like you mentioned, if they're on the bubble against UVA, that could be a make or break series for them. And given what we've seen in the past, that could be the perfect exclamation point for a team that's trying to make the tournament. I mean, we've seen it a ton in the SEC where a team that's kind of on the bubble gets hot, sweeps the top team, and really kind of almost lands in the tournament just off that weekend alone. And the way that the ACC is kind of developing, I think that is something that we see is kind of a lot more teams get the benefit of the doubt.
Absolutely. And That's something I'll be looking at. Even if they're not doing well, that could be that series could be one that depends on them to get into the ACC tournament even. So that's something to watch out for as we move forward this season.
Monty, that's a great transition into your, hometown team, Virginia Cavaliers. I mean, went to Omaha. Why don't you give us a quick recap on that?
Well, so Virginia, they went 50-15. They were undefeated in non-conference play during the regular season. They swept Miami. They swept Georgia Tech. They swept Louisville. They won road series to start ACC play in Chapel Hill and Raleigh against UNC and NC State, respectively. This was a very, very, very good Virginia team last year. They swept their regional with wins over Army and ECU. They came from a game down in the Super Regional to beat Duke 2 out of 3 times, a Duke team that had beaten them 2 out of 3 times earlier in the season. Before they eventually ran into the Florida Gators and blew a 9th inning lead that ultimately was basically the end of their season. They were eliminated, by TCU a couple days later, but I had a feeling that Florida game, the winner of that Florida UVA game opening night, was going to determine who was going to go from that side of the bracket to the national championship final series. And Florida was able to come back against the Cavaliers.
Yeah, and I think they had a lot of guys on base in that TCU game, only losing by 1 run. But again, it was very, very deflating being up in Omaha and seeing that bullpen. It almost felt like game over for how Virginia's season ended. And a lot of people kind of wrote them off after that. And I think that it was a credit to the talent and the coaching that was brought in. I mean, this is a team that definitely over-delivered when you look up and down the staff. I mean, they got a ton of production from people that they normally probably shouldn't have gotten it from. So kind of waiting to see how this Virginia team kind of goes from here, because it does almost feel like a more talented team than last year. But, they are losing a few of those key pieces.
I mean, and we'll talk a lot about the 3 offensive guys they lost. But for me, Nick Parker, Brian Edgington, Connolly Early, those 3 guys were transfers. They only spent 1 year on grounds, and they were absolutely fantastic. Parker and Edgington, all the most respect when I say this. These guys were average arms, making transfers from smaller programs to the ACC, and they were absolutely fantastic. Edgington, 9-3 and 18 appearances, 3.57 ERA, 94 Ks in 88 and 1/3 innings. Nick Parker, 8-0, 81 and 2/3 innings, and he went 7 innings, I believe, against Florida, completely shut them down, and neither him or Edgington gets drafted. Connolly Early was a All-American in some publications, had a monster year, 5th-round pick of the Reds. Unbelievable job by these guys that really, really overachieved. But now the only problem is when you bring in 3 transfers to overachieve, you got to find a way to replace those guys.
3 guys, too, that I think Virginia's going to have a very, very tough time replacing. I mean, 2 of them are Mount Rushmore guys in UVA history. Kyle Teal went 13 overall. Jake Geloff, UVA's single season and career home run leader. He went 60th overall to the Dodgers. It almost feels weird not talking about a Geloff at Virginia. It felt like almost like the Jungs at Texas Tech, that they were there for so long. And then now they're still a little bit of a tease with Aiden Teal, but he was injured a lot last year. We really don't know kind of what his health is or how much he's truly going to play. But, it doesn't feel like UVA baseball without Teal and Geloff in there.
Yeah, it's the first time, I think, since 2018 that there's not a Geloff on the field, but there is a Teal still. It's interesting. The other cool thing is that Jay Geloff got drafted in the exact same spot that his brother did in 2021. So I thought that was a cool little thing, the exact same spot, 2 years apart, 60th overall. But the underrated loss for UVA that a lot of people are talking about is Ethan O'Donnell, who transferred over for Northwestern. He also started all 65 games. He hit 354, 18 doubles, 13 home runs, 18 stolen bases, He was one of the three Gold Glove winners across the country with two names that I think you're familiar with in Dylan Cruz and Enrique Bradfield. So that's a very, very high honor for him. And I think that's going to be a big loss for UVA defensively once we talk about the outfield is there were so many times that Ethan O'Donnell, a ball was hit to the gap and you had no worries about it being caught. He was just an absolute animal out there. I think he's a very underrated loss for Virginia. Again, part of that lethal 2, 3, 4 hitters right there that were just unbelievable.
Yeah, and Ethan O'Donnell was also probably a part of my most awkward interview I've ever had. Is I asked the SIT for Griff O'Farrell, and he brought out Ethan O'Doyle. So I had all these great questions for shortstops, turning double plays, and stuff like that. And they roll out Ethan O'Doyle, so I kind of had to do a little bit of a flex there. But I think he is going to be a glove that is missed. I mean, like you mentioned, he was a guy that could really go and get any ball in the gap, and you really didn't have to worry about it. He stole a ton of hits, too, for the pitching staff. They kind of kept him honest, but again, I think that those three names, again, are just crazy bats to replace. But again, like we mentioned, they got a ton out of guys that probably shouldn't, like Jake Berry, Connolly Early. I mean, those are guys that when they were getting recruited, they really didn't flag a lot of people. So again, that's what really kind of makes me excited about this is they have a ton of talent coming in. It almost feels like if you remove, Teal, Geloff, and O'Donnell, it truly does feel like a better team, that they maybe have a better average than they had before.
Yeah, we're going to get into it here with the catchers. Obviously, we just talked about Kyle Teal. He's gone. Ethan Anderson, who was at first base, he's going to make the transition to the catching role. He was a top catcher recruit. He sat behind.
Monty, do you want to pull up the graphic?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you.
We got a little bit ahead of ourselves there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ethan Anderson's going to make that transition to catcher. He has sat behind Kyle Teal, learned a lot from him, and he's going to be the primary catcher. I believe that was a part of a promise probably made to him that he was going to get his chance to catch. It's going to happen. He spent time there all fall and has looked pretty good. It's, offensively, you're looking at his numbers from last year, and you're not losing a lot offensively if he's able to do what he did last year. And here's a little taste of what he did last year. He played all 65 games, hit 375, 25 doubles. That's a school record, 13 home runs, 69 RBIs, and was just a monster as a switch hitter. The problem is that transition to catcher is not an easy one to make. And it could cause him offensively to struggle a little bit. We saw it with Kyle Teal. Kyle Teal was a right fielder his freshman year. Sophomore year, he slides behind the plate, hits like 280. Still has a really good season, but he's not the Kyle Teal that we saw last year. The difference is Ethan Anderson has 1 year to figure it out behind the plate and maintain that offensive efficiency.
Yeah, Ethan Anderson, I mean, you're going to pencil him in to be the starter in probably just about every single game, barring some kind of injury or anything like that. But again, how does he kind of handle running a staff? How does he handle at-bats when he's been catching for 6 innings and it's a Sunday? That's going to be the big question marks for, again, this Virginia team. And I think it's going to be something that you have to look at with the strength and conditioning. And we've seen it a ton from Virginia. They have a ton of guys that seem to just always be healthy, always in the mix. And again, I think that Ethan Anderson, I think his numbers will dip a little bit. I mean, they almost have to, hitting 375 with 69 RBIs. But I don't think it'll be that big of a drop-off, as, again, he is a year older as a junior. He's been through this. He's been through it in the fall. I'm sure since the plan was always to be a catcher, I'm sure he was still catching bullpens while he was at first base. So I don't really think that that's something that Virginia has to worry about. But again, how does his defense kind of play as well? I mean, Kyle Teal was a Buster Posey Award winner, played tremendous behind the plate. Ethan Anderson is just something that we haven't seen at behind the plate. So that'll be kind of interesting to track, is how he kind of handles the defensive side of catching.
Yeah, if he can put up numbers near what he did last year, he's one of the best catchers in the country, right? Even if defensively he's not where he necessarily where Kyle Teal was. But the other thing is, I expected when I first entered the fall season, I expected it to be similar to last season where Kyle Teal started every game and then the backup was a transfer from JMU. He only kind of came into, to the very end of games to kind of pick up some of the, those games, and I expected the same situation this year. But what I saw in the fall was a little bit different. Jacob Ferentz has a bat. He hit 6 or 7 home runs in the fall, and he could again. I think Ethan Anderson has been promised to be the catcher, so I don't think you can push Ethan Anderson back to first base. But there might be times where Jacob Ferentz gives Ethan Anderson a day off behind the plate, lets him play first, or Jacob Ferentz DHs, because he's a D3 transfer from Salisbury. He hit 364, 12 doubles, 14 home runs. Again, I saw him with some major pop, and I did not expect that at all. I think he's going to play.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think caught a lot of the Virginia staff off guard, that he kind of is going to force his way into that lineup. Just to kind of look ahead here, I mean, we do have Anthony Parada projected to be the first baseman. He's a true freshman lefty bat. And again, if Jacob Farisha can kind of handle that and make that jump, I think that that's something that we'll see a little bit in that staff. And I think we have the graphic a little bit backwards, as we have, Henry Ford. I think he's projected to be at third.
Well, so Henry Ford, from what I understand, I thought Anthony Parada was going to be the guy. And again, in the fall, I saw Henry Ford playing a lot at first base, even though he's a natural third baseman. I expected to see more of Parada, and you may see that, but in the fall, I saw him briefly in an inter-squad scrimmage, and he got hit in the groin by a pitch and had to leave the game, and I didn't see him after that. I didn't see him in either game against ECU in the fall, so Henry Ford was over there, Ethan Anderson was over there, Bradley Hodges was over there. I didn't see much of Anthony Parada, so even though I heard Brian O'Connor saying Anthony Parada is a guy he's really excited about to be a first baseman, I think Henry Ford's going to get the first crack at first base over there, with Eric Becker getting the crack at third to replace Geloff.
I think kind of the only guarantees that we have is that Griff O'Farrell is going to be the starting shortstop. I mean, Luke Hansen's played a little bit of second base. Henry Gottbaut's played a little bit of third. I mean, there's a ton of open spots outside of Griff O'Farrell. But again, just to kind of touch on Griff O'Farrell, I mean, he's another kind of lights out guy up the middle where, Gold Glove in a college level glove, has a really, really strong arm. And then again, the bat to kind of complement that, hit 396, obviously. But again, I think that the story of Virginia is going to be how they kind of manage this infield with Luke Hansen. Luke Hansen's another guy that really kind of forced his way into that lineup, hit 356 in very, very limited exposure. Can he kind of take that next step as a sophomore is going to be something to watch.
Yeah, and here's a stat for you. Griff O'Farrell, UVA played 65 games last year. How often do you think he started the UVA hitting game with getting on base?
35.
Close. It was 33. He was on base 33 of the 65 games to start the game for UVA's offense. So when you wonder why Jake Geloff had 90 RBIs, well, it's because the chances were Griff O'Farrell was already on second base by the time Jake Geloff came up 2 batters later, because Griff O'Farrell had 28 of those were hits. He had first inning hits. He's been the leadoff guy since he got on campus. I think he's the best shortstop in the country. I think right now he's projected to be a late first round pick, and he just hits. The downside is he doesn't hit for a lot of home run power. Now, I think that could change. He had his first home run of the season last year at about in the second game of the Super Regional. It was a leadoff home run against Duke. And then he hit some home runs for Team USA. He was the player of the tournament for Team USA, led off all 10 games for them in a loaded lineup that included, Charlie Condone, Jay Slaviolette, Jack Caglianone. So he is an absolute monster, and he should still be the leadoff guy because that's where he's comfortable. But I'd like to see if he's added more of that power that I saw for Team USA, and I saw a glimpse of in the fall. If he's added some power, some home run power, because he's got doubles power, but if he's added home run power, he's going to shoot up the draft boards.
Yeah, that's kind of his only concern, is he does kind of remind me a ton of Jake Mangum and kind of his approach where it just always seems to get on base. But I think one more name we need to watch is Tristan Head, the switch-hitting freshman. How much is Virginia going to use him? Because I think the reviews out of the fall camp are, I think, pretty glowing for him in very, very limited action. So that's kind of going to be another one where maybe you see him playing some midweeks, get some action there, and kind of the more at-bats that they get out of him are going to be better. Let's go ahead and move to that outfield. Bobby
Before
Whalen's considered.
I
Oh,
was gonna
sorry,
say
Monty.
before we do, I mean, we need to talk about a little bit more about Henry Ford and Eric Becker because these two freshmen are absolutely unbelievable. These guys have talent that could make them freshman All-Americans. And then Henry Godbout is going to be the second baseman. And if he struggles, Luke Hansel will get that shot. But this Virginia team is deeper than last year, even though you're having to replace Teal and Geloff. And
Yeah, I
now
mean, there's a lot to like. I mean, they have a really good balance too of righty lefties, and obviously Ethan Anderson being the switch hitter. But I think that's kind of going to be a really big strength for Virginia is that they can kind of have a lot of flexibility with their lineup outside of Griff O'Farrell leading off and Ethan Anderson kind of hitting in the middle of that order. I mean, there's a ton of guys that I think take big steps in this Virginia team.
Yep. Now we can move on to the outfielders. I just wanted to make sure.
Sorry, I got a little bit too excited.
No, you're fine. I want to make sure we barely talked about Eric Becker, and I felt like we need to revisit him, make sure he got some love. But yeah, now back out to the outfield. This is where you've got some more depth, right? Bobby Whalen, I expect him to be the center fielder, taking the place. It's another transfer from the Big Ten, this time from Indiana. He doesn't have the power that O'Donnell has. I don't think he's quite as defensively strong as O'Donnell was, but he's still a very, very good player.
Yeah, and then Casey Sokey out in right field. I mean, started 65 games from last year, hit just a hair under 300. I think he's kind of another veteran back in there who's kind of back for his last ride in terms of draft eligibility and trying to shoot up that draft stock. Only hit 4 home runs last year, so if he can add to the power a little bit, and those 48 RBIs, I think, are a big thing that jumps out to me when you look at kind of his bat. I mean, he's had a chance to drive in a ton of guys to his time at Virginia.
And it's interesting because if you look at after his freshman campaign, him, Griff O'Farrell, Ethan Anderson, all at the same time, you're looking at him as being the most likely to be a first-round draft pick, and yet the other two are the ones that had monster sophomore years. Casey Sokey actually took a step back, and for an off year, those are still some pretty good numbers. They're expecting him to make a big step forward again, and if he does, that's going to help fill in the loss of Teal and O'Donnell and Geloff.
Anthony Stevens out there on left, I think, is another big name to watch. He DH'd a ton last year, played in 55 games, hit over 329, has been playing exclusively in left field as he kind of tries to get his feet under him in that position. He's kind of another name to watch out for as a breakout candidate for this Virginia team. As again, last year, I think he got overshadowed by the big three, and now it's his time to kind of rise up and shine in this lineup.
And he hit 5 home runs last year. I think 3 or 4 of them were in the tournament. He really found his power in the tournament, and that was big because he was hitting 7th, and all of a sudden UVA's lineup just got extended even further. I think he's probably still going to DH a bunch because I think they like Harrison Didewick's defense. I know Didewick was competing with Whalen for the center field job, but I think Whalen's going to get the center field job, and Didewick's going to shift to left and put Stefan at the DH role. But I really, really love Anthony Stefan and how he emerged out of nowhere last year. Again, he had a really, really good summer as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing him build off his sophomore campaign.
Yeah, another name to kind of watch out for that's going to sound familiar as much as we've talked about his brother is Aiden Teal out there in right field. Missed all of last season due to an injury. Kind of how Monty, I know you were at Virginia in the fall. What did you kind of see from Aiden Teal?
So we're going to talk about him twice because obviously he's a two-way player. The reason he missed last year is he needed Tommy John surgery late in his high school career. So that kept him out and kept him from actually seeing the field with his brother last year. But he is a really, really talented player, both sides of the ball. He can hit. And I think he's going to force some playing time. I don't know where. It's going to be interesting to see how they get him in there. But he's a guy that if somebody struggles or they need somebody to play in the DH role, he's a guy that can step in there and hit. And he's definitely, he comes from a family of baseball players and baseball coaches. So he is somebody I really am excited about. And I'm just excited to keep having a Teal in Charlottesville.
I know it almost feels right to have a Teal out there. I know he's going to wear number 7. He's going to be a big lefty bat. I think he's one to really kind of track if you're going to pick somebody to kind of, place a bet on of, hey, who's not in the lineup opening day, who you think could get a lot of chances. I think Aiden Teal kind of fits that role. I think he's healthy now. I think he's going to pitch a little bit. And again, I think he's going to be right there if any of these players kind of falter early on.
Yeah, and for me, like you said, if you're talking about two guys, if I'm talking about two guys that are going to be the first ones off the bench, if we're assuming that it's, Didowick and left, Stefan at DH, it's going to be Teal and it's going to be Luke Hansen. It's the backup shortstop. Those two guys have the ability to hit. And then, of course, Jacob Ferentz, the catcher. Again, there's a lot of depth here that I don't think Virginia has had on the bench in the past. And so if anybody's struggling a little bit, you may see Brian O'Connor make that change.
And depth is going to be a big part of, I think, our next part, if you're ready to jump to that, Monty, with this staff. It's one of the deeper staffs that we've talked about in the ACC. And I know that kind of the common theme that we saw in our first two shows and then with Virginia Tech is a lot of teams lacking depth. Virginia doesn't have that problem at all. We project Jack O'Connor to be the Friday guy, Jay Wolfork to be the Saturday guy, Bradley Hodges to be that Sunday guy, and then Cullen McKay, Joe Savino, and then Matthew Buchanan, I think, are other three names to watch. But, Monty, you saw a ton from these guys in the fall. What did you see from this staff in terms of shutting down one of the more loaded lineups in the ACC?
Well, so it's interesting because like what we talked about at the beginning of this segment with UVA is the three transfer guys that they have to replace in the rotation. And they've got a slew of options here. The question is who is going to be the guy. Jack O'Connor is the only guy. He was mostly the Sunday starter until they stopped having midweek games, and then they shifted early in and Jack went to the bullpen. But Jack O'Connor is a sophomore. He was a highly recruited pitcher out of high school. He was immediately an impact starter for Virginia on the first weekend of the year last year. So he's going to be your ace, it looks like. And then Jay Wolfork, who is unbelievably talented. He is supposedly getting a chance in the rotation now that he's dropped football. He was a quarterback for the football team, and he finally made the decision to just focus on baseball, and that might earn him a spot in the rotation. He looked really good pitching for Team USA over the year out of the bullpen. He's got a nasty fastball slider combo that's just, when you're watching somebody and you see them throwing 95, but it feels harder than 95, he's got that kind of zip on his fastball. And I think those two are the for sure guys for me in the rotation. The question is, are they going to go with one of these other four guys as the Sunday starter? I think Bradley Hodges is going to get the first look. Both him and McKay weren't used as much as I thought they would be as freshmen, but they're going to have to step up as sophomores.
Monty, I do want to ask you, there's no relation between Brian O'Connor and Jack O'Connor, correct?
Correct.
Just the O's. I mean, it seems like that's what we've almost come to be accustomed with again is Teals and O's. I mean, there's a ton of O people. I believe Jay Wolfork, if my memory serves me correctly, he pitched in Omaha for him, right?
Yeah, and he was the one that was warming up when Wyatt Langford got the game tying home run, and then Florida took care of business. He was the one left standing in the bullpen when Florida walked it off. The thought is Brian O'Connor wasn't ready to go for him because Jay Wolfork was a bit gassed from the dual sports. But like I said, a couple weeks later, I saw him pitching for Team USA, and he looked fantastic.
I mean, I think Matthew Buchanan's a name to really kind of watch out for us. He's kind of the lone lefty arm. If he can kind of rise up and be effective, I think he has a chance to be maybe that change of pace guy for this Virginia staff. But again, the flip side of that is I think any of those guys and that other potential starters, if they kind of struggle early, there's a lot of depth behind them for guys that can get bullpen arms.
What was really interesting with Matthew Buchanan is he was basically the midweek starter in 2022 for them as a freshman. And then last year he only had 5 appearances. I don't know if he got hurt or whatnot, but he wasn't really a factor last year. So I'm curious if I would assume almost that he almost certainly got injured. So I don't know how you just stop throwing a guy. But I really like the option they've got here in the rotation and the starters. The potential starters, you got Joe Savino, who has a lot of starting experience. They're trying to, they've gone back to the Elon well. They struck gold with Brian Edgington last year. They're going to try and do it again with Joe Savino. He is a guy that might be in the hybrid role. He could be in the rotation, or he could be one of those swingmen out of the bullpen. But I'm excited about this. And again, UVA has a propensity for overachieving with pitchers.
I really like that word, the propensity to overachieve, Monty. I might have to give you some kudos on that one. I think this really does kind of fit this UVA pitching staff very, very well. I mean, there's a ton of guys that are very, very underrated that didn't really get a lot of innings last year, outside of Jack O'Connor, obviously. But as we kind of look at these key bullpen arms, again, you mentioned Aiden Teal. That's going to be a name to watch out for as his health is kind of tested. But I think Blake Barker, the lefty, again, I think he's kind of a name to watch out for out of the staff as well as he kind of works in. I know he didn't get a ton of exposure last year, but I think he's kind of a name to watch in this bullpen.
Well, it's interesting because they're going to have to rely heavily on the sophomore arms. We just talked about Jack O'Connor, Bradley Hodges, Cullen McKay. Two more guys that are probably not going to be starters, but they're going to be really important is Evan Blanco and Kevin Jaxel. Those two sophomores as well. Those are high leverage guys who saw a lot of high leverage innings last year for them as freshmen. And to bolster this lineup, they brought in a Ryan Oshinsky and a Blake Barker in the transfer window. And those guys have some closing experience. So you've got a lot of guys that have high leverage experience. And then you went and got somebody like Owen Cody as well, who has starting experience from Penn. You bring in, a freshman like Charlie O'Shell, whose brother is currently an All-American at Duke. And then Aiden Teal, like we just talked about, I think they're looking at him as a potential back-end high-leverage piece.
Kevin Jackson's, I think, another name that you kind of have to watch out for. I mean, he had electric stuff when he came in. Over 30 strikeouts, only 24 innings pitched. I think he's going to be a name that I think warrants a lot more outs, too, as well. But again, as we talked about with Virginia, where they're going to have a lot of question marks and they'll have a lot of guys step up, I think Virginia is going to have almost a little bit of a pressure of, hey, if you don't produce right away, we got an entire staff of guys that we can go to. So there is kind of a little bit more pressure on this Virginia staff to deliver, as that is kind of been Virginia's calling card the past couple of years, is very, very underrated arms come in and shove.
And this bullpen is deep compared to last year, because last year it was basically Blanco, Jaxel, Wolfhook, and Barry, in the postseason. You might have seen Angelo Tonis in there sometimes, but other than that, it was those four guys. And if you didn't have those four guys, if you had to go beyond that, there wasn't much there. But now you can go a lot deeper, because you got to remember, three of those guys on the left side of the screen here are not going to be in the rotation, right? I mean, two of those guys, one of those guys will probably be the midweek starter. And then you've got two more guys to add to this projected key bullpen arms. This is a deep, deep staff. It's really exciting. They may take a step back in terms of the starting pitching numbers, but you've got to like the way their bullpen's coming together.
I think that they really do kind of shorten a lot of these leashes on the starters. And I think that'll pay dividends kind of down the road in June. I think that they have a completely opposite problem. I keep touching on it as Virginia Tech had last year, where I don't really see a lot of these starters going deep into games just because they have so many guys in the back end that when fresh can be a lot better than, a tired Jack O'Connor, a tired Jay Wolfert. I think that that's going to be a very, very key thing to watch, is this Virginia pitching staff.
And if you look at the stats from last season, the thing that you notice, Virginia loves strike throwers. So you don't see a ton of walks. So that's a huge part of it too, especially coming out of the bullpen, is you're not getting guys in the bullpen coming out to walk guys. So you got strike throwers. I'm really excited to see how well this staff does. Jake, if you're picking one pitcher out of this screen to really to say who's going to be the biggest impact for Virginia, who's it going to be?
I'll choose one from each side. Jack O'Connor, obviously, he's the biggest returning arm, 64 strikeouts in 65 innings. But Kevin Jaxel is a name that really, really jumps out to me. I think he has a chance to be the first guy out of the bullpen, kind of come in some of these high leverage situations and really kind of step on and explode onto the scene as a relief pitcher out of this kind of Cavalier bullpen. But Kevin Jaxel, I think, is the one that I'm really, really more excited about.
The one I really want to go with is Jay Wolfett because he's focusing on baseball for the first time as a collegiate athlete. But I'm going to go with Bradley Hodges. This is a guy. He's a two-way player. I don't think we're going to see him too much in the batter's box, but he's mostly a pitcher. He was highly recruited, higher recruited than he's up there with Jack O'Connor, and yet he walks a lot of guys. We just talked about how much they like strike throwers. He had 23 walks in 33 innings, which is not ideal. If he cuts those down, he's going to have a monster year, and I think he could have a huge year. And the other guy, if we're talking about somebody to keep bullpen arms, I'm going to go ahead and circle Aiden Teal. I think he's going to show why he was so highly regarded despite being healthy injured last season.
Yeah, I mean, before we kind of jump into the schedule, if we're going to pick a strength, I think Virginia has one of the better staffs in the country, and they're going to go as far as the guys on this list are going to take them. And I think that truly the sky's the limit of this Virginia team. Just want to bring up this comment before we kind of jump on. I think this perfectly kind of exemplifies this Virginia team. There's not a lot of flair. They don't, wear crazy neon uniforms and neon orange pants. They just kind of handle their business. I think that that's going to take you very far in college baseball right now.
Is he describing the baseball team or the basketball team?
He could be describing the football team, too.
Yeah. Well, they don't win in football, so. But yeah, no, it's true. They grind. It's been weird the last 2 seasons where UVA's hit a ton of home runs because that's never been who they have been as a identity under Brian O'Connor. They've always been kind of a pitching first and then fundamental station to station baseball, steal some bases, generate some runs, and now all of a sudden they've got guys that can just absolutely crush the baseball.
Moving on into that schedule, unfortunately, we don't have a nice, pretty graphic, so we get Monty's graphic design with a very vintage Virginia logo, I believe, and some great Times New Roman font.
Yeah. We normally just take the graphic the school has done, and this is the 6th team that we've done, and they are the first one that did not have a graphic. They just did a standard kind of press release link so that you would just go to their site and see the schedule, and it's not all cute and poster like. So I got a little creative, not much creative, but a little.
Obviously, the big one that jumps out is going to be that Jacksonville College Classic. Wichita State, or I guess what's left of Wichita State, Iowa with their pitching staff, and then Auburn, a team that's really kind of surprised everybody and has gone to Omaha a ton. I mean, this is a very, very underrated tournament, as it kind of seems like the Texas ones get all kind of the blue chips. I mean, this is a great, great field outside of Wichita State.
Yeah, and my plan is to go down there and go to all those games and kind of figure out what we've got there in Iowa and what we've got from Auburn, because I know other people from our staff aren't going to be able to make it. We got quite a few Iowa writers and SEC people who are going to be interested in Iowa and Auburn, but I'm going to be down there to cover Virginia. That's the plan anyway. I'm really excited about it. Chances are Brody Breck is going to pitch against Auburn, I would imagine, in the Friday game for Iowa versus Auburn.
He's usually the Saturday guy.
Is he usually the Saturday guy? In which case, you're looking at Virginia facing Brody Breck on Saturday. I know the number 2 Iowa guy is really good as well. So either way, Virginia's going to have a really tough test second weekend because they're going to be facing a Wichita State team that, yes, is clearly rebuilding as they lost half their team. But
it was like 90%. It was
it was more than. But they're going to be facing tournament teams in Iowa and Auburn.
We truly could see Brody Brecht, who quit football this last fall and is kind of getting his first season being in only baseball, versus Jay Wolfhook, who did the exact same thing for Virginia, which I think is tremendous for the sport, that there's 2 guys that want to focus on baseball, because both of them were very talented on the football field. But
that is a tantalizing pitching matchup for February.
I will say this, excuse my language, but shit gets very, very real very early for this Virginia team. Go at Miami, then play Wake Forest back-to-back. I mean, that's one of the toughest 2 teams, I think, in the ACC as a 1-2 start. And like I said earlier, every team is circling Wake Forest. But I think Miami has the talent. I mean, I know in the past they've run out guys that touch 97, 98, so that's really not a slouch pitching staff as well. But I think that all eyes are going to be on those first two series.
Well, and Virginia's had trouble going to Miami in past years. In 2022, they were on a roll. I think they got into the top 5 again in 2022, and their slide that year, 2 years ago, started in Miami when they got swept by the Hurricanes, and really kind of blew them off course. They ended up as a 2 seed in the East Carolina Regional when they were a top 5 team. I think the beginning of April. So it's going to be interesting to see. Those first 2 tests. Now, an underrated non-conference game before that is going to be that Penn State game where we get to see former Boston College coach Mike Gambino return to an ACC matchup with his Penn State Nittany Lions. But yeah, the Miami Wake Forest combo, they're going to Pitt. Pitt has been a major problem for them in the last couple of seasons. At Duke, that's not an easy road trip, as the Blue Devils look like they might be one of the top teams in the ACC.
Those are 2 bring your own energy series too as well. I mean, I know Duke's kind of gotten a little bit better, but again, Pitt's probably not going to pack the place out mid-March out at that field, and Duke at times has been very, very sleepy as well. So I mean, those are going to be 2 very, very, if things don't go right at Wake Forest, I mean, you're going to have to really, really look within and be a mature team and kind of handles those next 2 weeks.
And I don't think Duke's going to be able to flex that game to Durham, to Durham Bulls Athletic Park. So I think it's going to be at Jack Combs Field, which is a lot sleepier than the DPAP.
Just to kind of look ahead a little bit, you mentioned Boston College. I mean, that is in very, very deep Fenway Park territory. I know that's what usually when they do that series is late April, early March. They haven't announced that one as well for the Pete Freights Classic at Fenway Park, but that might be like one of their last home or last road games is at Fenway Park. Because when you look at that schedule in May, I mean, obviously Navy's a midweek. GW, NC State, VT are all at home before they go into that ACC tournament. So it's going to be one of those things that they really kind of have to very carefully keep on the right side of the top 16 so they don't get out of a rhythm that last month and not going on the road.
Well, and that was a big thing. Remember, they slid a little bit last year and then were able to right themselves in May, right? They were able to sweep and got a top 8 national seed, and they rode that all the way to Omaha. They're going to look at the schedule and see that as an opportunity to do something similar.
Louisville is, I think, another kind of series to watch out for as they go there. It's usually right about the time it starts getting a little bit warmer in Louisville. And again, that was a team that I think was a lot better than their record kind of led on. That's another kind of trap series where I think we'll learn a lot about those 2 teams that weekend.
Well, their team wasn't better than their record kind of showed. I watched them in person, and yeah, on paper they should have been better, but you could see why they things were just falling apart left and right for them. Yes, they had talent, but they just kind of self-destructed. That's neither here nor there. That's last season. We got a new Louisville team this year, but it is an intriguing series. And if you guys have seen my tier list, Louisville, Florida State, Miami, those are all teams that are dark horses that could surprise us and compete for an ACC title even.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how I saw them like a month earlier, and I said that they were going to be in Omaha playing for, very deep, and then they don't even make the tournament. But, yeah, I think that they definitely are going to be a spoiler. I'm very, very high on that Louisville team. But, again, Virginia Tech, can Virginia kind of exhaust some demons out of that series? Because it looks like they're going to need it down the stretch. I mean, this is a very, very difficult ACC slate with a ton of upper echelon talent that you have to go and play.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that Wake Forest series. I will be there for all 3 games. It's going to be a blast. The pitching, the lineups, it's going to be a blast. That's if I had to highlight one series, not including that Jacksonville College Classic, I am circling that Wake Forest series.
I'm excited to see where this Virginia team does because again, they're not a flashy team. As Al Davis says, they just win. You coming,
Jake, to see Wake Forest UVA? St. Patrick's Day?
I'm looking at that Georgia Tech series. I think I might actually try and come. I'll have to look and see what the schedule looks like in terms around the country and if that's worthy of it. But I think I'm kind of penciling in that Georgia Tech UVA series.
Yeah, it'll be a fun time, but this is a exciting schedule. I really like the non-conference schedule more than last year because of that Jacksonville College Classic, because of the Penn State game. But other than that, the in-state schools are still kind of rebuilding. VCU still recovering for the loss of Sean Stifler to Notre Dame. Old Dominion still not back to where they want to be, and Liberty is still on the fringes there. So they still need to take advantage of that weak in-state rivalry stuff in the midweeks and try and continue to go undefeated in that regard.
Monty, as we kind of move to closing remarks, we'll start with Virginia Tech. What's the floor, what's the ceiling, and what's your prediction?
So the floor is last in the ACC, right? The pitching could go entirely wrong. I think they could surprise again. I don't think they're going to hit. There's no way in my mind they can hit the 2022 levels, even as Coach Sheff has mentioned that it's similar to that. But I could see them making the NCAA tournament. I could see that. If the pitching, for whatever reason, they find a Drew Hackenberg and a Griffin Green out of nowhere, they can surprise some people and I think compete for an ACC tournament. I think their floor is last place. My prediction is they're gonna be on the bubble and miss out.
Yeah, my floor with them is the worst Power 5 pitching staff in the country. Everything goes wrong for them. They average giving up 6 runs a game, can finish dead last in the ACC, and they kind of do feel like they missed out with a lot of the talent they have. But I think their ceiling is a 2 seed in the ACC tournament, like you said, a bubble team. I think that they're hitting, if it kind of averages 5, 6, 7 runs a game and the staff is just good enough, I think that is kind of the ceiling of this team, is in that second tier, right on the bubble. And I think my prediction is I'm leaning that they're going to be in the tournament before the ACC tournament rolls around, and their pitching completely dooms them, and they have those 2 bad losses, and I think the committee leaves them out for it. I think that they're probably going to be 65, 66 is going to be my prediction for them.
Right.
I know that you're probably going to be very biased with it, but let's talk about Virginia.
I am not biased at all.
Negatively biased. You're like ceiling and floor for Virginia.
Virginia can get to Omaha again if that's the sky. You said it yourself. Sky's the limit. I think the floor is. I think they're still an NCAA tournament team, even at the floor as a 3 seed, at the lowest. So my prediction is they end up somewhere in between. No, I think they find their stride. I don't think they're going to host. I think they end up as a 2 seed.
My floor with them is, I think, honestly, being a very low 2 seed or very high 3 seed in the ACC tournament. I think that they're going to be a team that's firmly in, even on the low end. I think that they're a 3 in a very favorable regional. High end, I mean, Omaha. Virginia's been there so much. They return a ton of talent. They have one of the deepest staffs, which is always something that we see kind of carries these teams to Omaha. I think in terms of hard predictions, I think they're going to be one of the last teams to host. I think that they're going to fall in that 14, 15, 16 regional, and then in a super regional they get paired up with somebody like Wake Forest or a really talented SEC team that kind of knocks them out. But I think that they end up being a fringe host where they kind of end up getting the nod because we'll pick 3 ACC teams and they're the 3rd ACC team to host.
Oh, okay. Teams. Yep. So I'm excited. So we're wrapping this up. Next week, is it Louisville and Clemson?
Let me see. I was just about to pull that up. Yes, Louisville and Clemson on Wednesday the 24th. We'll be sending out a great, fantastic graphic that our graphics guy Jake made to kind of promote for it. But be sure to tune into that. Obviously, Monty will cut up some of these clips and kind of get them in short form on Twitter. So be on the lookout for that as well. Let us know what you think about Virginia and Virginia Tech. Monty, it's been a pleasure.
Yep, we're almost halfway. See you guys next week.